Hello everyone. Lately I've been doing a lot of rearranging and organizing out in the shop, and it was finally time to get my laser cutter off of my workbench and onto its own dedicated stand. So in this video I'm going to talk about this stand that I put together. It has a couple little cool features in it, so let's dig right in and see an overview of my new laser cutter stand. My laser is a Bright Star something something. I don't actually know the model, and I have Frankensteined it over the years by adding all sorts of various bits and bobs to it. But it's roughly a 16 by 20 inch cutting area, and it is a 60 watt laser, as you can see from this tube extension back here, CO2 laser. And it just really needed its own stand. This was on the workbench, and it takes up a pretty substantial amount of a workbench, and it really doesn't need to be up there. So I started with this Rockler shop stand. You can get these at Rockler, and here's a crazy thing. This video is featuring a Rockler product and is not sponsored by Rockler. That's probably like the first time ever. But it is a decent stand. They're relatively inexpensive. They're pretty flexible. It's just kind of a nice thing if you don't want to weld up your own stand. And this one here is about 36 inches wide by 24 inches deep by, I think, like 30 inches tall. And it has, nice adjustable feet. It does connect together cleanly, so you can like throw this together in a couple minutes, and it is a nice stand. The only thing that I don't like about it is without all of this extra stuff in there, it's not really stable laterally because there's no real cross bracing, so you can kind of shift it around like that. No matter how much you tighten it down, you're just not going to get around that. But once you start kind of putting in some other stuff into it, it will kind of brace up and be more solid. So yeah, Rockler stands are decent. They're very flexible. You also have all of these little holes for adding hinges and doors and things like that. And part of the reason why I wanted to do this video is to show you kind of the flexibility of these stands, because I didn't really see many videos other than the Rockler sponsor videos that kind of gave you an idea of how to put together something with one of these shop stands. So up top, the laser itself sits on a 3/4 inch piece of MDF that is screwed underneath into these pieces. And then on the bottom, there is also a 3/4 inch piece of MDF that is then screwed onto the bottom down here. And this kind of forms a box. I think this is a 1/2 inch piece of MDF, and I have a couple dados cut in that so that these little dividers can kind of slide in. We've got the water chiller on this side that is used to cool the laser tube, and then a couple cubbies for material storage. And then the idea is that this spot up here is completely open, even into the side for larger pieces. These would normally be pieces that would be too large to fit on the laser, but I could, cut them down, and it's just kind of nice for the storage of it. Now, fun fact, I don't actually have a dado blade or a dado stack on my table saw, but I do have a CNC router, so actually all the dados for these pieces were actually cut on my CNC router. And the beautiful thing about that is these pieces were cut to be pretty much the exact same, and then I just set them up on the CNC and ran it through and cut the dados nice and precise. And these things are just loose right now. So that I can, maybe take them out, maybe adjust them, something like that. But they're just kind of loose in there, and this top is loose on there as well. There are side panels to this, but the front and the back are all completely open. The back is open to allow a little bit more airflow for the chiller, and just so, if I get a really long piece, there's just no real reason to have a back on this. I could maybe make a little lip on the back just so the stock wouldn't push back. But these little side pieces are actually attached into the frame with screws. There's holes all up and down these rails, so it's screwed into these rails. And this is just 1/8 inch MDF, but I did a piece of 1x2 that is just tacked onto the outside. So the screws through the 1/8 inch into this 1x2. That's what holds it in place. And this top is actually being supported by the 1x2s that are in all 4 corners. And I did leave myself an 1/8 of an inch gap here and in the back, so if I did ever want to kind of finish this off in front, I could, and I could definitely just slide a piece in the back, and I could have a closed back in this. But yeah, that's really all there is to it. Just couple of dados, couple of boards, and just a couple of these dividers. CO2 lasers need a lot of kind of auxiliary devices to help them run. You've got the water chiller, which circulates water through the CO2 laser tube and keeps that nice and cool. You also have the exhaust fan over here that sucks all of the nasty fumes out of the laser cutter and vents them somewhere else. And then you also have an air compressor, which is used to blow air through the nozzle and basically clear away the particles as you're cutting or engraving. Now, you might not be able to see the air compressor. It is actually mounted underneath, somewhere down there. So it is mounted underneath the chiller from the underneath side, and I also used a large piece of polyurethane rubber that I had left over when I was molding some wheels for a BattleBot, and mounted that into the bottom of this, so there's kind of a nice vibration cushion underneath there, and it basically just hangs down on the bottom of the stand, so that's out of sight, out of the way. It doesn't really need to be serviced or accessed in any way, so it's just kind of part of the bottom of the stand. So let's talk electrical. The laser itself plugs into the wall, obviously. Then you've got the chiller, which plugs into the wall. You've got the fan, which plugs into the wall. And then you have the air compressor that plugs into the wall. Now, you could just have a power strip that, you know, simplifies this a little bit and has one plug, so you turn on the power strip and everything turns on. But you don't always want everything to be on. If you're setting up a job or, you know, setting up a cut, you don't want the air compressor running, you don't want the fan running, you might not want the chiller running, things like that. So you kind of want to have some granular control over each one of these different things. Now, I went back and forth on this a lot, and I was thinking of having like something built into the stand, like, you know, a little power center thing in the front where you could turn things on and off, stuff like that. But I decided the best way to go was just to consolidate everything into the laser. Power is going to be coming into the laser pretty much regardless, so we might as well control everything from here. That means one plug comes into the laser and then everything else plugs into and is controlled by that. So on the side, I've added 3 switches. So I've got a switch for the water chiller. That turns that on. The next switch is for the air compressor. Turns that on. And then the last switch is for the exhaust fan, which takes a second to spool up. So now we have all of these switches on the side of the machine, and they're completely independent from the main laser switch power, so that we can operate all of these things independently, because sometimes you might want to turn off the laser and then have the exhaust running for a few minutes. So let's take a closer look at these switches and how I got the electrical all situated. It's really not too much to go into here. Here's 3 switches. They're round rocker switches. I had these already in my parts bin, and it was just a simple matter of laying this out, using a drill bit, and then using a step drill bit to just kind of open up the holes, and they are a nice snug fit in there, and they're not going anywhere. Each one of these is rated for about 15 amps. The power actually comes in from the back, is bused to all 3 of these, and then separately they come back into the back where everything is connected. So this is the back of the machine. We have the main power input right there, which I'm going to detach since I'm talking about this stuff, and then we have the 3 separate plugs. If you notice, I don't have anything labeled, and the reason it's not labeled is because this is the top switch, this is the middle switch, and this is the bottom switch. Whatever I plug into will just become that, so it's just easier to remember what is on what location, and quite frankly, each one makes a slightly different sound, and I know what sound each one of these things makes when it turns on. These doors, if anyone's ever had experience with one of these laser machines, they're actually kind of cool. Every single little panel here opens up, like that is the very end of the tube. This is the non-firing end, and then you can see this top opens up, and this is the actual laser tube that fires off camera over here into the rest of the thing. And then these panels also open up, and there's like just a little tab to where this whole panel can come out. So quite simply, all I did is use these little snap-in receptacles, drilled some holes in all 4 corners, used a Dremel to cut the rest of this out, and then just finished it off with a file. And these are nice, snug fits. I also did add a little hot glue just to make sure that they were nice, snug fits. And then the wiring is all just bussed in together back here. I don't really feel like showing you a close-up picture of all this because it is a little bit messy. But rest assured, I did use 12 gauge wiring on everything throughout. The total entirety of this whole thing, I think a lot of people think that lasers use a ton of power. They really don't. The laser itself is really only a couple amps. It's a 60-watt laser. That means it's firing with 60 watts. The whole thing with all of these on and the laser firing at full power is about 8 amps total. So what's coming through this receptacle right here is about 8 amps. That immediately gets bussed down into all of these with 12 gauge wiring. Everything on all of these is actually soldered in place, as with the switches, 12 gauge throughout, 8 amps total. It usually only runs about like 5 or 6 amps, so just something to keep in mind. There is no safety concerns here. So yeah, that's basically how all this is put together, and makes this nice and easy to where all the wiring is just kind of consolidated back here. So this is my new laser cutter stand. Pretty happy with how it turned out. I'm really excited for the material storage because I've never had that with my laser. I had just a huge pile of scraps before, so this is going to help out quite a bit. Having these separate switches over here is really nice as well. And the other thing that I didn't really mention was this little 3D printed enclosure for the new DSP controller. I've had this controller in here for, I don't know, 3 years now, and I pretty recently printed this little enclosure for the LCD and the control panel. Previously, this was just kind of like laying on the desk with the wires just kind of feeding back into the machine. So this was a nice way to clean all of this up. And it's just, you know, a relatively simple PLA print that just houses the whole assembly here. So yeah, pretty happy with that. The Rockler stands, I'm going to give them a 7 out of 10. I wish they had some kind of cross bracing or something to make them more stable. If you use these just as is with something down here and something up there, you know, just one shelf down below and something on the top, they're going to be pretty flimsy. Flimsy is not the right word. They're going to kind of bend and stretch. Like if you try and pick it up and move it, it will kind of want to twist and torque on you. They need something else. So adding some sides, adding something like this helps them out tremendously. They're a lot heavier gauge and beefy and robust than you might think that they are. It is a very, very heavy and well-built stand, especially with the integrated feet and things like that. I do recommend them, especially if you just don't really want to build the frame for this. I really didn't want to just sit there with plywood cutting all day and making this frame, so it really helps out. And this laser is probably close to 200 pounds, so I just really didn't trust this to be a solid wood frame, so having a nice metal frame is good. And this whole thing is 300 pounds or so. It is a very heavy thing. I've had this sitting out like this in my shop for about a week now, waiting to finish this video, because it is just not really practical for me to move it back and forth constantly. It's going to take me some time to move this back into the final position because it is just so darn heavy. So anyway, thanks for watching. Check out my Facebook page for any updates to my channel. I'm going to keep making some shop videos, and eventually I plan on doing a shop tour once I get things a little bit more situated. But thanks for watching. See you in the next video.